Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and this is our last regular show of the season. Starting July, we go on hiatus for 3 months, and we come back in October. But we are using the opportunity to introduce people to some of the candidates, Green Party candidates, of course, who are running in Connecticut this year. And of course, we will continue that in October as well, and maybe have a couple sporadic shows as the summer progresses. But tonight's guests are both running for state rep, sort of in the Shoreline area between the Connecticut River and New Haven. Madeleine Leveille is running for state rep in the 35th district.
That's right, Rona.
And Colin Souney is running in the 86th district.
Absolutely.
And because I'm clueless about it, New London is so simple. 2/3 of New London is the 39th, and 1/3 is the 40th, and that's all I ever have to remember. So you especially, Colin, have a big territory, correct?
My district is broken up. It's really strange. It's all of North Branford, which is very exciting. I get one whole town to myself, which is very fun. But it also covers a northern portion of Guilford, which I think it ends up being a little less than half because it's a little more rural. It covers Route 80 north all the way into Durham. I get a little bit of a western portion of Durham, and with that western portion of Durham, I encroach on the eastern portion of Wallingford, and then of course south through North Branford. It's a really strange district. It's the 86th district, but hopefully that having that full of North Branford is really going to help me out.
So your district, Madeleine, where does it encompass?
My district is not encompassing as many towns as Colin's. It includes all of Clinton, all of Killingworth, and about half of Westbrook, the northern half of Westbrook.
Wow, so you both have to cover quite a bit of ground, though, in your campaign.
Well, I bought gold sneakers, and those are my walking shoes, and I plan to visit as many residents in the 3 towns between now and the end of the campaign to find out what people want and what people feel they need.
I think that really works out well. I know in Waterford, the Greens had a huge amount of success by knocking on every door in town. And, voters are so infrequently really asked what they want that it's kind of a refreshing change. Well, I don't know which of you wants to tackle this first, but I was curious. I've run for offices, and it's fun in a way, but it's challenging too. What made each of you want to run for office, and also what made you want to run as a Green rather than taking an easier route with one of the major parties?
You want to go ahead?
Certainly, thank you very much, Colin. This spring and into the summer, I was one of the people that mobilized the folks in Clinton to become aware of a developer's proposal to put an industrial waste recycling facility within the wetlands. And because we were able to mobilize people, we were able to mobilize people who are Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green, and unaffiliated. We had 300 people at each of 3 meetings.
Wow.
That were very technical. And it was so energizing, and it spoke to my own belief that it's important to organize the community for allowing sustainability. And I'm in a position in my life where I'm semi-retired, that I have the time, and fortunately I'm blessed. I have good genes. My mother is 104 years old.
Wow.
And cognitively functioning very well.
So you're just starting the first of like 6 terms, right?
No, I believe that in term limits and bringing in new blood and new ideas. So 6 terms, no. But a number of terms, absolutely.
So what about you, Colin?
Well, I'm going to go backwards. The reason I'm Green Party, first of all, is because, quite honestly, the two-party system is just totally defunct at this point. There's so much bickering between the two. They've actually fallen into stereotypes, which is something you don't want in politics. You want to be able to keep people having an open mind. And I've been registered Green for most of my adult life, as long as I could be while we were able to be. And before that, I was independent. And quite honestly, the deeper we go into the years and the further we go on, now it's 2018, I'm looking at 2020, 2024, as we go out, this two-party system has failed, it's continuing to fail, and all it's doing is causing more and more problems without looking at the problems and creating solutions. The two-party system's never created any reasonable solutions. It seems like it's just a mitigation process instead of being creative. Now, one of the reasons I decided to run was the incumbent, who's doing a great job. His name is Vin Candelora. He's the Republican. He's a lawyer. He's doing a great job. He's put together some good policy, but he's been in for 12 years, 6 terms. I agree with Madeleine. There's a thing, we should be really paying attention to term limits. We don't want these cronies sitting there. I call them cronies when they've been sitting in there that long, because personally I think that you can't go uncorrupted. Ted Kennedy, who was our senator, just dropped out because one of the things he had said was, there's just so much you can do until you get beat up by it. It's that scary up there. And I really want to make a change. I want to go into Hartford. I want to start standing up to some of these problems that are basically draining the taxpayers' dollars, and bring in new ideas and a new face from the working class people, as opposed to Vin Candelora's a lawyer. There's a lot of people who are from a different class of life. I represent the working class, people out here who are mechanics. I'm a divorced man, I'm 43 years old. I think there's a lot of people in Connecticut who share the same beliefs that I do. And I think it's time a guy like me steps up and starts running for office. And I'd love to see more people like me running for office. I think it's important that people that are involved in the community at a level of work, not the country club, not, constantly going out to breakfasts and dinners and all this wonderful stuff. People who actually have to work a 40-hour week plus. These people aren't being represented because they're working so hard. They don't have the time. I'm self-employed at this point, and I've been lucky to be self-employed. I've spent my whole life working very hard, and I believe that now it's my responsibility to return a little bit back to the community, and by running for office, I think I'm going to be able to accomplish a few of my goals.
Well, you mentioned the major parties bickering, and that is true. We see a lot of the bickering, but it seems to me also when it comes to confronting important policies, they're sort of complicit in turning the other way.
Very quickly. We just had, I just watched in New Jersey, I think I heard the story. The Democrats were pushing for the millionaires tax very hard. And then all of a sudden it comes up to vote and they back off. It's the big switch. Where's I could call it intestinal fortitude. Where is these people's willingness to stick to what they believe in? Where did it go? And why is it so hard to believe in something anymore?
Well, I think that's really interesting, Colin, because I understand that Ned Lamont in January was advocating that the wealthy pay fair share of taxes and was proposing what people have rhetorically called the millionaire's tax. I call it fair taxation, progressive taxation. But now that he's the Democratic candidate for the governor's race, I haven't heard him talk about that.
And, I think it's really unfortunate that it's been dubbed the millionaire's tax because people think, in some parts of the state, like Greenwich, where Ned Lamont is from, if you own a house, you have assets of $1 million because prices are so inflated. But it's really a tax or a surcharge on annual income over $1 million, which is quite a different thing from having $1 million in assets.
Well, and here in the state of Connecticut, I'd like to consider where we try to go is to competitive taxation, not millionaire's tax or whatever. Right now, I think we're in the $500,000 to $1 million and above tax bracket. We're taxing at a 6.99 rate. New York, I believe, is 8.97. I believe I read Rhode Island is 8.63. At this point, I see no reason why we shouldn't be able to go up to 7.5%, create what I thought to be looked like about $300 to $400 million worth of revenue into the state, while still being competitive with other states and not chasing the rich out. Because it's one thing we need to do is be careful about who we are taxing because we don't want to lose our.
Well, we don't want them to all move
wealthy
out of
residents.
state, but the fact is we're the lowest taxed
Right.
state in
And that's
the
why they're
region.
here.
And I think that, one of the things is I have an academic research background, and looking at the research, there was a research study out of Stanford recently that showed that if you raise the taxes on the super wealthy, they do not move. So that it's a shibboleth that's been raised that is actually not supported by the data.
And I'm not surprised. And when we have seen corporations move out of state, and it's always attributed to our taxation, I think it's more often that they move to places that are often more expensive but provide more resources for the money.
We just lost, I think it was GE to Massachusetts, which I think is a horrible loss. And of course we lost Alexion, Pfizer I hear is moving out, these companies that, in review, did we lose companies or are we gaining a tax base that we once didn't have because we had to pay them to stay here? A lot of these companies are moving out because they've found greener pastures that are willing to pay them. Massachusetts, maybe they found a nice little prey that they get to feed off of and steal the money from. I say good riddance to some of these companies. I also say that we need to start putting some of this corporate subsidy money back into small businesses, local commerce. There's been a 25-year decrease in small business economy. I just read this the other day. It's been for 25 years, there's been a steady decrease in local economy. I blame it on online spending. I mean, you got this community of people. You can buy a roll of tape for $5 online. You walk in the store, it's $15. It's very difficult to compete with that.
We have allowed the internet sellers and large corporations unfair advantage. For a long time, Amazon wasn't paying sales tax. And that means the small businesses are disadvantaged because their goods, while they're immediately available, are a higher cost.
And that cost is more than just the 6.35%, because now some of these small businesses, they have to keep a book on that number. So they have to keep that money in a bank account, send that money in, and take the time to do the bookkeeping. If some of these small businesses are moving 500-600 products a week, they have to keep a book on that, a point of sale system, which is very important, of course, but it creates a higher expense within the small business that's even becoming more increasingly difficult to recover against. It really cascades into a problem where the only recovery is to figure out how we can start to get some of these large corporations to kick back into the American people's pocket a little bit.
And I think that that's one of the things people are concerned with. Greens are not interested in business and economic growth. And I think Greens are absolutely. It's the notion of sustainability. And we know that small businesses have a larger multiplying effect on local economies than do these international, multinational corporations that come in, soak up resources without fully paying. There are corporations such as Walmart that actually trains its employees on how to use the system
Sure,
to
how to
gain
apply
benefits.
for Medicaid
Exactly.
or food stamps.
And so we are in essence subsidizing Walmart.
And then they're subsidizing, and they're the largest, most wealthy family in the world. There's no reason why they can't take their employee base, create a full-time employee base, and offer health care benefits for their employees instead of letting their employees become a warden, basically, of the state while they're a ward of the state, while they're a part-time employee for this company that's basically telling them how to do it. It's a very weird system we've allowed to happen in this country, and it goes completely against the green
And
thought.
unfortunately, the people who are working retail jobs are working at minimum wage part-time, so they have to have 2-3 jobs, and that's still not enough to be able to live. And I don't know about all of your communities, Colin, but somebody working a minimum wage job in Clinton, Killingworth, or Westbrook are not likely to live there. They're certainly not living on their own, And we see more and more of our young people are having to live at home with their parents.
It's not just retail, though. I'm retired now. I worked in early childhood education. Since about 1990, I had positions that required a college degree. I don't think I ever made more than $16 an hour after doing this for 30 years.
Wow.
So I'm married. It was a second income. My husband was self-employed for a lot of it. So as long as, and I worked places that gave us health insurance benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I worked for. So I could do it, but I was working with a lot of younger women, especially, over the last decade or so, who they'd work all day with young kids, which is a very exhausting, wearing, challenging job. And then they'd go second shift and they'd either be in retail or they'd be tending bar or waiting tables. They'd work till 4, take a little break, and then they'd be working again from 6 to 10.
And a lot of people don't even see the costs involved with that, because now they have a child who's being brought up essentially without the guidance and the moral, direction that they need to, that we usually had gotten from our mothers.
Right.
I'm a big proponent for women's rights and everything, but I also say we still need someone at home, whether it's the father, the mother, grandmother, uncle, safe, with a moral direction. We've lost church. Everybody's forgetting about church and the importance of actually believing in good and doing good for other people and charity. That, our children are being brought up now, and the expense involved with trying to have a child who hasn't been raised properly because of neglect, that child goes to become an expense to the criminal system, goes to become an expense to the education system, it becomes an expense basically to society. And just like you just said, if you can't offer people enough money, like a minimum wage, I fully support a raise in the minimum wage. I also think that when we raise the minimum wage, we need to be careful that our small businesses aren't going to suffer. If you have a small business and you can legitimately say, hey, listen, you can increase the minimum wage, I'm going to suffer. Well, hey, I think we might have some state money available for someone like that. Instead of a company like Pfizer or Alexian or something that's going to soak, $1 million is going to help a small company way more than $25 million ever helped Alexian. It just makes common sense to me, and we've lost that whole common sense program. And the incurred costs of long-term childcare, it's great to be sitting with you guys. If you have you have a history in childcare, you have a history in mental health development. The Greens support marijuana legalization. I fully support marijuana legalization. I've been a marijuana advocate for a very long time. Since the inception of the program, I've been very involved in it here in the state of Connecticut since 2012. I've always proposed and been a proponent of children's safety and education for use and abuse. Now, I never hear politicians talk much about this, because when you talk about legalization of marijuana, it's very difficult because now the children are involved. Nobody wants children around getting high. It's very important. But people that need to understand that there's also alcohol out there. And if we can regulate these things similarly, we won't have to worry about these children as long as we're smart enough to educate them. And then if we can also help the societal problem of both parents working 2 full-time jobs, the poor kids sitting at home alone. This is a big, huge problem that's been created.
Yeah, part of the irony of what I saw was that these moms, they were raising other people's kids.
Yeah.
But they rarely got to see their own. And so it just didn't seem like the most efficient way to do things. Right. So, and I agree totally with you. I've kind of got into being interested in drug policy from a different angle. I worked for Head Start as a home visitor for several years. And the last year I did it, I think it was like 2006-07, it was about when Cliff Thornton was running for governor. And I had a caseload of 12 children, mostly 3-year-olds, 1 or 2 4-year-olds, and a third of them had incarcerated parents. And the parents were not convicted of violent crimes. They were low-level drug offenses. And these very young children were virtually orphaned. They were mostly dropped off with other relatives, DCF. I won't say they didn't mean well, but they were not competent in advocating for the kids' interests. I had one child who was, the incarcerated mom had lived with her mother, so when the mom went to prison for 6 months, They just let the child stay with grandma. They never gave the child, the grandmother custody for 3 months. The grandmother had no access to the child's medical records. It was just insane.
If there's anything the current climate with the children hasn't taught us, is that they're not being paid attention to enough. I mean, that's quite clear at this point.
So as much as some people might hate drugs, like having orphaned preschoolers who are bouncing around from house to house and having their bonds with their parents broken, that's not so hot either.
No, the
No,
long-term
and-
expenses, again.
And as a forensic psychologist, I do a lot of evaluations for the court, and some of the evaluations are for families involved in DCF and child protection matters. And I'm really sorry that the children that you were working with had those experiences, because my experience with DCF is that the DCF social workers mean well and often do a good job, but there are plenty of times where they are overburdened.
Their caseloads are insane.
And there are
agree.
problems. But I think that one of the benefits of the Green Party is its notion of sustainability, which means not only looking at the short term, but looking at the long term. And you create this, you fracture this bond, it has long-term negative repercussions, as Colin was saying. It also, even in the short term, it costs the state money to incarcerate. We're talking about $50,000 a year to keep somebody incarcerated. To keep somebody incarcerated for marijuana for $50,000 a year, that money could be much better spent providing early child services.
Absolutely. I always wonder why the fiscal conservatives aren't up in arms at how much we're spending on incarceration.
Well, there's a complication, and that there are several things. One is roughly 4% of Connecticut's inmates are in private prisons. So there's a corporate interest to continue this policy of keeping marijuana illegal. And there are other policies. People are afraid. You know, the movie Reefer's Madness, which was made in the 1930s, I believe, people still have fears that if you legalize marijuana, society is going to run rampant. States in which have legalized marijuana, and Colin, you know more about this than I, the evidence is that there's
a decrease of drug use, there's decrease of criminal activity. Usually you don't find marijuana users going out and robbing people so they can go buy marijuana, especially in states that allow it to be grown, because I'll be honest with you, if it means that much to you, you're going to grow it. And most of these people do. It really is nonsense, especially when we look at what pharmaceutical industry has done for America and drug use. While it needs to be reviewed under a microscope, you can remember that opiates are very similar to heroin. We used to stigmatize people who used heroin. And once again, anybody who is an addict they are not the problem, they are a victim of the problem, and we've totally overlooked that. There's a mental health issue. But in states that have legalized marijuana, decrease in opiate use. I have very close personal friends of mine who have cold turkey quit heroin just by switching over to marijuana. It was not a pleasant experience for them. They've told me nightmares about it, sweating, days on end, no eating, just frightened, horrible things. But they got through it, and they just used marijuana to help.
So rather than being a gateway to drug abuse, which is the reputation that was bred by Reefer Madness, it has been shown to be a gateway out sometimes.
It's a gateway to recovery for most people. Now, a lot of people still look at it as a drug, and you're still using a drug, but let's be honest, everybody's on a drug. I'm drinking water right now, but it might as well be coffee.
It may have fluoride in it.
Exactly. I mean, everybody in America is on a drug. Even if you jump from an airplane and you've never touched anything, adrenaline is a drug. Everybody's on a drug. It what makes them comfortable, and we can't keep judging people for this. What we need to do is find out the root cause of their addiction and abuse problem, not their use problem, and help them with their addiction and abuse problem, which usually stems from childhood trauma, to be honest with you. Most people who are susceptible to becoming an addict suffer from childhood trauma at one point or another in their life. And I say most of the people. Statistics, I think the number is probably like 60 to 70%.
That's a pretty high percentage.
It's absolutely, and it's astonishing is what it is, that many people grow up with something that happened to them as a child. And it may just be as simple as fall down the stairs, someone you trusted yelled at you one time and you didn't really realize it. You know, simple stuff like that can actually really change a child's mind. It's amazing to me where we've come. Again, with this healthcare in America, we have children who are not being paid attention to. They're going to grow up to be the future problems of America. And we need to start spending money on these children and figuring out how we can educate them and take care of their mental health instead of treating them like criminals.
And as a retired school psychologist, of course, I have some concerns about legalizing marijuana, but I know that there are very good programs out there to provide the appropriate education, not
Right.
simply the don't say no or
Right.
saying, oh, this is so bad, yet at the same time glamorizing it, which of
Right.
course is going to pique a child's interest. But any revenue that would be raised for taxing marijuana sales would clearly need to be set aside to provide education for students for prevention and then to provide remediation intervention for people who do have drug problems.
Although I would recommend one additional use for the revenues, which is help rebuild the communities that have been
reparations in
destroyed
communities are
by
absolutely important.
prohibition.
Yeah, that's something. Cliff Thornton, I'm friends with Cliff Thornton. I sat down and had a couple conversations with him. And
He was my inspiration.
Oh, absolutely. He is an inspiration, absolutely. He was a proponent of the medicalization of all drugs. Now, this was back in the mid-90s or the early 2000s when that was like cutting edge. You know, nobody talked about that. And he had a perfect point. Back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there were doctors using ecstasy and LSD to help people with PTSD. They didn't know it was PTSD, it didn't have a definition, but to help people have mental breakthroughs through experiencing psychoactive drugs, which they then scheduled as a Schedule 1, meaning it has no medicinal value. It's 2018. If it has no medicinal value, how come half the nation is on some of these drugs anyway? You know, you have methamphetamines, which isn't too far off from Adderall, and a lot of people are using these drugs to maintain their lives every day. Doesn't mean they're on methamphetamines, it just means they're on a drug that maintains their life so that they can operate out here in society. Some people like marijuana. I don't see why we're still fighting this war in 2018 when Cliff, again, started it so many years ago, and so many people are still asleep.
Now, the war on drugs has been going on since Nixon.
Oh, it was defined in the early 70s. Yeah.
And we've lost.
Mm-hmm.
We've lost. I think we need to have a different tactic.
Well, and one thing I had learned from Cliff was that prohibition just makes drug use more dangerous. There's no regulation of purity. You don't know what you're getting if you're buying, of dosage.
Drug dealers are not usually
they're not gonna,
upstanding members of community.
Yeah, they're not going to make sure that they're not selling to a minor.
Yeah. More importantly, you don't know what they're putting in some of these drugs.
Right.
I just heard stories, you know, they put the fentanyl in the heroin now.
Yeah.
If we medicalize these drugs, and it's very difficult to support the full medicalization of drugs without a full review of the health care of society, because you don't want everybody doing drugs, but you also need to regulate these things so that we don't have dangerous products getting into them, so that people who are using them, again, we're not treating them like criminals. We don't want to enable anybody, but we don't want to treat them like criminals, and we want to give them a safe product to start consuming. And if we can tax and regulate that product and make a little bit of money for the state, I mean, is that such a bad thing?
You know, for perspective, 500 years ago in Turkey, like drinking coffee, you know, getting caught was a capital offense.
Was it?
It
Really?
was for a brief period of time, and then
How
I think the
unfortunate, and
emperor
Turkish
decided
coffee
he
is so
liked it.
wonderful.
But I imagine it, you know, in those conditions, if someone really liked coffee, they wouldn't have the choices we have. We can get it organic or fair trade or shade grown, or, you know, and we don't have to worry about like not getting access to it. So yeah, so I guess I like coffee also.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to be living now and not then, and then
Right.
and there.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, when you were talking, both of you talking about drug policy, it seems like we should kind of move into a more general healthcare policy. And I've had this notion that when we're talking about keeping corporations and businesses staying here to go along with raising minimum wage, if we had a state single-payer healthcare system, it would take burden off of businesses,
Particularly small businesses.
yeah, but it wouldn't take the burden off of Walmart exactly, because they've already removed the
They've done a
burden.
good job of it
But
themselves.
it would even out what they did. It wouldn't give them an unfair competition to be having that bad policy that they have. And so the Green Party also, for at least 20 years, has supported the idea of a single-payer, truly universal healthcare system. And now we're being told on the national level it's impossible, even though we have 4 different models of public health
It
care.
only seems to be impossible because America's done a great job is segregating its health care. You have health care for the poor, which is your hospitals. Then you have health care for the rich, which are usually your doctors that are entrenched in your communities of wealth. I don't think that a poor resident living in downtown New Haven is going to get access to the same doctor as a wealthy resident living in Fairfield. And it's done a great job at segregating this, and I think that's part of the reason why this single-payer healthcare is difficult, because of the segregation that's been created.
Well, I think there have been fears that have been generated by insurance companies, which is that if we go to single-payer healthcare, people will have to queue for lines, for surgeries, for treatment, and I don't think that is actually the case. But then at the same time, you ask people, how is your Medicare? I'm on Medicare.
Me
I
too.
love it. It works. If it can work for a large segment of the population, it would make sense to expand it. I have an interesting story. A couple weeks ago, my husband and I were in Sardinia, which is an island off the western coast of Italy, and my husband had a small medical emergency. At 1 o'clock at night, we go to the emergency room, and they gave us a prescription. They did not charge us for the hospital visit, and the prescription was the equivalent of about 10 US dollars.
Wow.
Whereas, and we priced it, if we were to get this prescription in the United States without insurance, we'd be talking $700. So I think
astounding.
our system is highly flawed, and we need to address that.
I'm curious if I'm not educated enough to know if the American insurance industry actually puts up a fight against any of this extravagant billing. I've heard stories of people with medical device like a leg brace that you can buy in CVS for $30 and them getting billed medically like $300. Everybody has to make money. I understand that there needs to be money in medical billing because there's a lot of people involved, but I'm curious if the insurance companies actually put up a large fight.
Well, insurance companies, I know, speaking from my own experiences as a psychologist, if a patient were to pay for a session, they would pay a higher rate than what the insurance. If I bill the insurance, let's say, for a typical psychotherapy session of, let's say, $100, the insurance company reimburses $63. But if you were to have to pay out of pocket, it would be $100.
Right. So they've pre-negotiated an amount that they're willing to pay.
Yeah. But in addition to Medicare, we have a lot of other different public insurances here. we could choose what model we like. There's Medicare, there's Medicaid, there's TRICARE, there's VA. All of them are public systems, and they're quite different one from the other. Some, the doctors are actually, government employees. Some you choose your own. It kind of runs the gamut. So it seems to me we've been collecting data on how all of these systems work for like decades.
It's funny when I hear about the universal health care, the one thing I get concerned about is how are we going to afford this? But nobody wants to keep taxing the people. I mean, how much you can't squeeze the people for so much money. You have to be able to get some from the government. But one thing we were discussing was an increase in things like a sugar tax, possibly, taxing soft drinks to help afford some of these increasing healthcare tax, so that if we want to go with something that does allow everybody to have single-payer healthcare, there's money available to allow this to happen. 'Cause a lot of people get very, very nervous when they start seeing Greens talk about free healthcare for all, because
and it isn't really free, but it isn't free now either.
Exactly.
It isn't, and there are so many disincentives for people to have appropriate health treatment. People who are, my stepson's wife, her father did not have insurance. He did not have Husky CT. He had chest pain, and he said, just muscle strain. He ignored it for 2 weeks. He died.
And one of the other costs of our system is that people lose their houses due to medical costs. So I suspect that with so many things, we might have an initial outlay, but once the system gets moving, we might discover that we're saving on a lot of these externalized costs that we were barely aware of before.
Any program you lay out costs an initial amount of money. When they were just talking about the tolls again, it's going to cost an initial amount of money to get these programs running. But yeah, you hope that the long-term savings and the long-term implications actually get us to a position where everybody is able to benefit.
And I think that is absolutely true. And if we have health insurance, people who don't have health insurance will go to doctors rather than waiting. And oftentimes now they wait until they have to go to the ER. And an ER visit, you're talking several $1,000s. And that comes either out of them, or if they don't have any insurance, it then comes out of the hospital and it's tacked on to your bill.
Yeah.
Medicaid is a very different thing. Personally, I just signed up Medicaid D Husky. I got approved because of my self-employment. I've suffered for the past few years. It's one of my reasons for wanting to get into politics at this point, because I've noticed there's a big problem if I can't make money, and I've been able to in the past working hard. And at under 55, everything has led me to understand that if I pass away, any of my owed money will be taken out of my estate because I'm under 55. I have a big problem with that, especially for first of all, if you have a disabled child, you can create a fund and put the money in that. There's different things you can do. They've made creative outlets for some people, but once again, these creative outlets only get used by smart people who understand how to work a system, and it's not used by the people who actually need these programs. It's very interesting to me that we're not protecting the people who need to be protected, and we're enabling the people who don't need to be enabled. Very strange in the state of Connecticut.
Yeah. I think in this country in general, I don't know that Connecticut is the worst example, although we certainly have our problems. What else do you see as issues that the next session of the state legislature will have to confront?
I think that we've talked about revenues, but I think we need to talk about how to save money. And Connecticut is a relatively small state. We have 169 towns. Each town has its own governments. We have, I believe it's 212 school districts. And that means,
because there are unified districts.
And that means that we are duplicating services within miles of each other. Westbrook, which is one of the towns in my district, has a school system of roughly 600 students. If we were able to provide more regionalization, we would benefit from savings of not duplicating services. And we have a model for that right now in Connecticut with the Council of Government, where some towns work together to provide services. And so if I were elected, and when I'm elected, I will be advocating for enabling legislation to allow the towns to share resources. It doesn't make sense for Westbrook to pay for a registrar of voters when Westbrook, Clinton, for example, could hire one person for that service, and there would be savings there.
And in terms of, I hadn't thought of this before, but in terms of education, we have the RESCs, the Regional Education Service Centers, like Learn, like, I forget what the one in your area in Middletown is. CERC, yes. There's EastCon. And some of them have tried to do some regionalization in terms of setting a common school calendar for the whole region, so that kids who are bused from one town to the other, the towns don't have to pay for an extra 30 days because the 180 days are different in every district, or getting a bigger pool for health insurance and stuff like that. So it hasn't been done in a very comprehensive way, but their mechanics are there to do some kinds of regionalization on the education side and not just on the city service side.
Exactly, and that would save money.
It might help correct some inequality as well, because right now, I'm in poor New London, and almost 50% of our property is off the tax rolls, and a lot of it is off the tax rolls to institutions that don't just serve New Londoners, they serve the whole region. But people from Waterford or East Lyme who come to our hospital, they're not bearing any of the burden of having the hospital, take up acres of land for a tax-exempt use. So I think if we could regionalize some funding, it would go a long way to correcting some imbalances.
Right, and property taxes, the studies are very clear, are highly regressive. I was talking with a friend who volunteers at tax season to help people, and he helped a woman, a very elderly senior citizen, whose total adjusted income was $12,000. Her property tax is $4,000.
Yeah, and if she lives in New London and bought an old house in the south end of town, that's getting away cheap. Yeah. It could be, in reality, more like $6,000 or $7,000. So yeah.
One of the budget issues because we're coming up in an odd year, so we're going to be talking about a lot of budget issues in the state of Connecticut. It seems to me like, and I bring this up a lot, we have Alexian, Pfizer, we just had, as far as expense issues, there was the stadium, was it the Yardgo Stadium? There was a big debacle up in Hartford. You have all these expenses that I see. I see large expenses, and I'm curious what the return on that investment is. And I'm pretty sure that if I'm a corporation like Alexian, and I'm coming into a country, my return on investment isn't the state's interest, it's my interest. So now when we are allowing companies to come into the state and they're using the state as a return on their investment, there's an issue with that. Why is the state losing money to have a corporation here? Again, we need to start looking at some of these large lump sum expenses on corporations and start to figure out how we can help benefit small business and local commerce. Pfizer was right here in town, right?
Yeah, as soon as they had 10 years of tax abatements, and in the middle of year 9, they decided they would pull up stakes.
See,
And they didn't have to provide any reimbursement
There was
to
no
the town.
penalty program.
I
Yeah.
don't think so. I don't think
Yeah.
the city negotiated that very well. I mean, right now it's like water.
Once again, as
Water
I
under,
get, it's
you
like
know,
in
under
these
the
entrenched
bridge,
politicians.
but-
Is it a negotiation issue, or is it some politician was able to make out on the deal and they just forgot to add the language that was
You know,
necessary?
I don't know. I guess we only have about 5 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
So we didn't get to all the topics, but you know, you can come on again. I think for the last 5 minutes or so, you can tell people how to find out more about your campaign, how to contact you, get more information, write letters to the editor, whatever, in terms of support.
Okay. Absolutely. At the moment, my campaign staff are working diligently to bring online a Facebook page, and it's www.madelineleveille2018.com. I also have a Facebook page, which is Facebook at Madeleine for State Rep. So I would encourage people to contact me on the Facebook page. I would be very happy to hear other people's ideas, because one of the nice things I find about the Green Party is that it is open to a diversity of ideas. It's not something where the leadership says, you must vote for this bill.
No, you know, decentralization is one of our values and one of my favorites.
And I'd like to encourage people to go to Souney for State Rep, SOUNEY for staterep.com. Feel free to browse the website. I'm on Facebook also. Also, anybody that really wants to get an idea of how the Green Party really likes to impact things, there's something called the Green New Deal. Some people call it the New Deal. This is a genius move to help create a better infrastructure that helps renewable resources within the communities, whether we do hydroelectric, solar, green transportation, electric. Any of these projects I hope to bring into Connecticut and really start getting these people back to work.
And the jobs really could be quite transferable. I think, you know, Electric Boat, you know, a big employer, you know, New London and Groton, I think they made trolley cars at one time. And
There we go.
now, you know, here we are, maybe a century later or 3/4 of a century later, and we're importing our train cars.
Right.
And all it's building are submarines, which, I don't know, we didn't talk really.
The war machine is a very difficult
Yeah.
conversation to have in politics. That's for darn sure.
And it's
In this
and
region,
it's also a very
really
difficult
awful.
Yeah.
difficult
Yeah.
conversation to have in Connecticut.
Right.
But I think one of the virtues of the Green Party is that it's not afraid to tackle the hard issues. And I think that rather than giving money to Electric Boat for development, the state needs to consider monies for the small businesses. We have lots of skills, and I think that's where you're going. We have skills, we have a very skilled workforce, and we could have people develop windmills, make solar panels, and move towards other kinds of new wave technologies.
And piggybacking on some of what you're saying, industrial hemp.
Don't even
my
get me started.
mind,
You guys over here know
yeah, you have
Uncasville.
1
I want to open up
minute
the
to
paper
talk
mill.
about.
I want to open up the paper mill and start growing hemp in Connecticut and pump out some hemp paper. I would love to see the landscape of Connecticut change with hemp everywhere. I don't want kids to get involved in this stuff. I definitely do not think it's good for kids. But I do think that industrial hemp is absolutely imperative to the future health of our people. I mean, before it was illegalized, everybody used hemp, alcohol, and opium just to get healthier. That's all they weren't using it to get, well, some people were using these products,
Right.
but most that was the medicine before pharmaceutical industry came
yeah.
out. Hemp clothing lasts longer. They say there's studies that show that hemp sequesters more CO2 from the atmosphere.
Oh, really?
It helps decrease the
Yeah.
half-life in certain nuclear fallout areas. It's just an incredible product. It grows like a weed, for crying out loud. It restores nitrogen back into the soil. It's a restorative crop. And it doesn't, and right here in Connecticut, we had a problem with all the tobacco farms going out of business now. you know, why can't we be growing hemp, which seems to be like a great way of making money for the state, or at least maybe some private contractors who've got a brain in the state maybe want to step up to the plate at this point.
And I think it would be a terrific basis for just small-scale industry. I believe we are out of time. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Madeleine.
Thank you.
We'll
Thank
put these
you
shows
very
up
much.
on YouTube, and maybe you can come back again when you have a few more miles under your feet.
Invite us
and
back
knocking
after
on
we get
doors.
elected.
I will come back and I will bring my sneakers so that you can see how worn they are.
How many miles you've put on.
Exactly. And I'll be so much thinner too.
Yes. So thanks a lot. And for all of you out there, we will be back in October. So have a great
Awesome.
summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.